It's been a little more than a year since actor Matthew Perry was found unresponsive and later pronounced dead in a hot tub at his Los Angeles home. Now, disturbing details about the star's final moments are coming to light in a new documentary. Like what really was in his system when he died, and how much? Who, quote, preyed on his addiction, and was someone profiting off his struggles? I'll walk you through the details. For Law & Crime News, I'm Kennedi Walker. In the new Peacock documentary, we learn the Friends co-star eerily foreshadowed his own death. In his 2022 best-selling memoir, Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing, Perry opened with a chilling line, saying, quote, "Hi, my name is Matthew. My friends call me Maddie, and I should be dead." And less than a year later, he was. But was it inevitable, or was someone fueling his downfall? The documentary takes a deep dive into Perry's childhood, revealing that his father was an actor, which sparked Perry's own desire to pursue a career in the entertainment industry. But then the doc takes a darker turn as it dives into Perry's long-term struggles with addiction. Viewers hear Perry's own voice reading from his memoir. We hear him telling his story in his own words, which hits a lot harder than just hearing someone talk about it. At one point, the actor described himself as, quote, "the luckiest man on the planet," recalling his $1 million weekly paychecks from the iconic show Friends. But behind the glitz and glamour, the reality was much darker. Perry documented that for years, decades even, he fought a bitter battle with drugs and alcohol. He revealed that his first taste came at just 14 years old when he consumed an entire bottle of wine on his own. In 2022, Perry finally told his story to the world, claiming to be clean and determined to stay that way. He shared the painful details of his struggle, including a near-death experience. In his book, Perry writes about spending 2 weeks in a coma and 5 months in the hospital after his colon burst from opioid overuse when he was 49. The actor fought for his life, and after the ordeal, had to use a colostomy bag for 9 months. The memoir goes on to reveal that he underwent 14 surgeries on his stomach, and the scars became, quote, reminders to stay sober. Perry also opened up about doing ketamine infusions, saying at one point he did it every day to ease pain and help with depression. The novel gave his fans a raw look into the life of a man who, despite his fame and fortune, was dealing with a personal battle that almost destroyed him. But his sobriety did not last. The documentary highlights the shocking details surrounding Perry's final days and the people who are accused of playing a role in his death. According to ABC News, the star fell off the wagon in the fall of 2023, and that in the span of 1 month, Perry paid $55,000 in exchange for ketamine. According to the autopsy report, Perry's death was chalked up to acute effects of ketamine, and the manner was accidental drowning. 5 arrests were made in Perry's death, which included 2 doctors, his live-in personal assistant, and an alleged drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen. Investigators say when Perry became addicted, the 5 defendants took advantage.
Defendant Placentia saw this as an opportunity to profit off of Mr. Perry. He wrote in a text message in September 2023, quote, "I wonder how much this moron will pay."
According to ABC News, Perry allegedly paid doctors $2,000 for a $12 vial of ketamine before his overdose in October.
These defendants took advantage of Mr. Perry's addiction issues to enrich themselves. Investigation has revealed a broad, underground criminal network responsible for distributing large quantities of ketamine to Mr. Perry and others.
Perry's live-in assistant, Kenneth Iwumasa, pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to distribute ketamine causing death. Dr. Salvador Placinia and Hasveen Sonia, who has been dubbed the Ketamine Queen, both pleaded not guilty. Sonia is charged with 1 count of conspiracy to distribute ketamine, 1 count of maintaining a drug-involved premises, 1 count of possession with intent to distribute methamphetamine, 1 count of possession with intent to distribute ketamine, and 5 counts of distribution of ketamine. Placinia is charged with 1 count of conspiracy to distribute ketamine, 7 counts of distribution of ketamine, and 2 counts of altering and falsifying documents or records related to the federal investigation. According to court documents obtained by the New York Post, on the morning of his death, Perry reportedly asked the longtime assistant to administer the first ketamine shot at about 8:30 a.m., another shot 4 hours later, and a third shot 40 minutes after that. Allegedly, after injecting Perry with the third shot, the assistant left, and when he came back, he found Perry face down in the hot tub. To better understand the dangers of ketamine abuse and addiction, I'm joined by drug addiction specialist Joe Schrank. So let's just dive right in. Matthew Perry openly struggled with addiction for decades. Can you explain what makes opioids and ketamine so dangerously addictive?
Opioids are dangerously addictive because of the physical dependency on them. So people who become physically dependent on an opioid, whether it's, Vicodin prescription or heroin or a street drug, they will be very, very, very sick if they don't maintain that, if that makes any sense. So the motivation to continue to use is there. Otherwise, they're sick almost immediately. It's called dope sick, and it's a very common thing. Anything can be addictive. Americans, we're addicted to a lot of things. Sometimes it's a behavior, sometimes it's a substance. So the question is oftentimes, what is addiction and what is dependency, right? So there may not be the physical withdrawal from ketamine, but for whatever reason, he became very dependent on it at minimum.
And ketamine is often used for therapeutic purposes, including depression treatment. How does its
Yeah.
misuse in cases like this turn it from a
Mhm.
medical aid into a deadly substance?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, that's the truth with lots of things. It's not widely known or talked about, but there's 500 Americans a year who take a lethal dose of Tylenol, right? So what we do with any substance matters. The therapeutic doses, under the supervision of a doctor, in the right setting, can be very helpful to certain people, using ketamine. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense to vilify the ketamine. It's like, well, what was he doing with it? And why was it such a high dose? So I think that it's always important to keep that in mind, that, look, you take too much Tylenol, you got a big problem. You take too much of anything, and we're always need to defer to people who are licensed physicians for anything that we're taking, any kind of drug, because everything has a side effect and everything can be very dangerous if it's misused.
Right. And Perry was allegedly receiving multiple ketamine injections in a single day. What
Yeah.
are the dangers of administering high doses in such a short time frame?
There's lots of different dangers of that. I'm not exactly sure of what any individual would experience as a result of using more than they should, or ketamine is administered with depression. It's still under medical supervision, right? So it's not the kind of thing that you just buy ketamine and take whatever. It also, a lot of the kids that we talk to when they come into treatment and they talk about wanting to try the ketamine infusions, you have to explain to them, well, you're not going to a rave. Like the ketamine that's used in as a therapeutic tool to help people with depression is not the same thing as abusing ketamine. So I don't know. It sounds like as much as the drug, it was his behavior that was what was lethal about the whole situation.
What are the signs that someone is developing a dependency on ketamine, and how does it compare to an opioid addiction?
In opioid addiction, people are very lethargic. There's lots of sleepiness. You hear that stuff. I need to nod. You hear that. They sort of nod off, that kind of a thing. So, ketamine traditionally has been abused as a club drug. So people are, more up, that kind of a thing. I don't know what it was that was so appealing to Matthew Perry about ketamine. I'm not sure what he was getting out of it. I think that any addiction, behaviorally, I always tell families, well, are there always stories? Because consistency and reliability is not the strong suit of somebody who is abusing drugs or has some kind of addiction. So when everything is a story, when things don't add up, when there's holes in the story, when people are very down the hole of their addiction, they're the least accurate source of information about themselves. So, you hear that a lot about the lying and so on and so forth. That is all true. There is a cognitive distortion associated with people who are using too much of anything. So consistency of behavior is critical. When we show up, when words match actions, we're probably not experiencing egregious substance misuse. When everything is, oh, you wouldn't believe it, this happened, that happened, and oh, I didn't. Well, yeah, I did pay the mortgage, but no, because when everything is like that kind of convoluted thing, that's a really good indication of something being off.
And Perry's assistant allegedly injected him with ketamine multiple times on the day that he died. Would someone in Perry's condition be able to give proper consent for such treatment?
I mean, that's a very good question. First of all, an assistant, a Hollywood assistant, shouldn't be injecting anything into anybody, right? If he was having some kind of, if he was looking to get the therapeutic value of ketamine treatment, that needed to be administered by nurse practitioner under the supervision of a physician, the physician himself, those kinds of things. So the assistant is complicit in this. Was he of sound mind to give consent? Maybe. I don't know. I mean, his addiction was so well known for so many years and so many decades. As sad as the case is and as sad as the situation is, it's actually more surprising that this didn't happen sooner. Not that it happened the way that it did, and the final days of it, and who was injecting what, and what assistant was going out and scoring the ketamine. All those details do matter, and those people should be held accountable for their behavior. But the truth is, his addiction was that was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. It wasn't something's going to be the end of the story, and it could have been a lot of things before that. So yeah, I mean, could he give consent? It's very hard to prove that people don't have consent. We hear that a lot from families too. Well, we'll have them committed, and it's like, no, you won't. You're not the Kennedys, and this isn't the 50s. Like, it's very difficult to hold people against their will. So yeah, I mean, I think that ultimately the assistant shares the responsibility. The responsibility lies with Matthew Perry. Like, he was the one. He was the grown up. He had choices. He had every advantage to seek whatever help he needed. So ultimately, we're all responsible for our own mental health. Of course, we need help. Of course, there are variables, but at some point, the onus of managing any health condition, whether it's hypertension, type 2 diabetes, or mental health, is on the individual who has it.
And Perry's death was ruled an accidental drowning due to acute effects of ketamine. Can you explain how ketamine affects the body in a way that could lead to something like this?
I mean, it sounds like there was a slowdown of his heart rate. He maybe lapsed into unconsciousness. What I can comment on is that there are hundreds of thousands of people who die every year from their misuse of substances, whether that's alcohol, whether that's ketamine, whether that's opiates, whatever it is. And if you ask yourself, how many obituaries have I read that said they died of acute addiction, right? We still live in shame, we still live in denial, and we still live in lies. Matthew Perry died because he had a severe addiction. In my world, it's not really so different than saying, well, he had multiple rounds of chemotherapy and ultimately the cancer won. He tried, but we didn't get the result that we wanted. So, I always have very strong reactions to when I see things like, well, he drowned. Like, no, that's not exactly what happened. Or cardiac arrest, well, after decades of cocaine use. There's lots of different ways to sort of look at this. So, I think that we do need to see a cultural shift and be more honest about it. Matthew Perry had a serious mental health issue that shortened his lifespan. There's not really shame in that. Lots of people do. Lots of people have mental health issues. We need to recognize that mental health is as important as physical health, that it does shorten lifespans, that we can do a better job of it. Not just for the Matthew Perrys of the world, but there were probably 300 or 400 other Americans who died the same day that Matthew Perry died, who weren't celebrities, who we don't necessarily know about. I mean, their family does. So I always think of these instances as an opportunity to have a larger discussion about the drug use in America, so we can do a better job of managing it.
Well, for those people, lastly, who are experiencing something, who are going through addiction, what advice would you give them?
All drug policy is successful to the degree to which we're going to be honest about it. And so whether it's an addiction in our family, an addiction in our personal lives, and in our community or in our country, we need to be honest about it so that we can address it. We can't address problems that we don't own, right? So we can't say, I have a broken arm if you say, no, 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 my arm's not broken. No, 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 I'm not going to do that. So I think that honesty about it is really important. I also want to communicate to people that people get better in a variety of ways. The cultural messaging is go to AA, right? Or be totally abstinent, or 12-step process. Lots of people find success in doing that. I happen to be one of them. Most people do not. The rates of recovery among the 12-step spiritual shift modality are incredibly poor, and they're incredibly low. So I would say seek lots of different opinions and find what fits for you. The definitional authority of recovery lies with the individual. So if someone's recovery is medicinally dispensed cannabis, if they're going to give up, alcohol and heroin, but they're still using cannabis, okay, that's great, because there's no lethal dose of that. Let's not thumb our noses at improvement for people, and let's not shame them if they're not ready, or they never will be ready to have the kind of recovery that the people around them want, right? So what I say is I encourage all people to talk to your doctor, for one. It is a medical issue. We don't involve the medical community nearly enough. Seek the support of friends, find peers, and know that you're not alone. There's 24 million Americans. There's 24 million of us out there. Unfortunately, we're not very vocal, and we don't necessarily have a strong presence, but we should. And also, if you're looking at nonviolent drug charges, you shouldn't be, right? That, drug use is a lot of things, but it's not crime. And if you're a young Black man and you've been harassed by the police for some nonviolent offense, you shouldn't be either. Those are the kinds of things that are wrong, that keep people sick and don't help people, because we're not honest about it, right? We need to be understand that people with addictions are our brother-in-law, they are our clergy, they are our accountants, they're everybody. It's 1 in 10 Americans, and we need to do a much better job about dealing with this. I may have ranted there. I'm not even sure I answered your question.
You did.
Okay.
Thank you so much
Okay.
for speaking with me, Joe.
All right.
I appreciate you
absolutely.
for coming on.
Okay, thank you. Take care.
To break down the legal implications of this case is Robert D. Groot. Robert, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
So let's just dive straight in. How strong is the prosecution's case against the 5 people charged in connection with Matthew Perry's death?
The case is quite strong. This is what we would call in legalese a linear conspiracy. It would go from one person to the next, ultimately going to the consumer, who was Mr. Perry, and unfortunately, we would also refer to him as the decedent. From reading between the tea leaves here, I can have a sense and feel that a number of the people who are co-conspirators but not indicted in this charge have already made their peace with the United States Attorney's Office and have agreed to become witnesses. And that would enhance the position of the United States in dealing with this case, because you would have inside players who played a role in this linear distribution of drugs, and talk about the person ahead of them, the person in back of them, and ultimately where the drugs wound up, and the result that occurred.
Now, I would love to know, what kind of legal liability does Perry's personal assistant face, especially since he administered ketamine and left Perry alone, allegedly?
Uh, you know, in the federal system, when people act in a conspiracy, and we would call that Pinkerton liability, as in the United States versus Pinkerton. For example, if we were going to rob a bank and your role was to get a gun, my role was to steal a car, and the assistant's role was to get a mask. Now, getting a mask is not a crime. Stealing a car is a crime, and getting a gun may be a crime. As co-conspirators, we are all each other's agents, so we are vicariously liable for the acts of the others in the conspiracy charge itself. So a court may look at the person who actually administered the shots, even though they did not fully comprehend the seriousness of their act, just as culpable as all the other actors in the case.
In cases like this, how difficult is it for prosecutors to prove that a person's overdose was directly caused by an individual supplying them drugs?
Um, it would it would run in this fashion. A medical examiner who is qualified to perform a post-mortem examination would examine the body of the decedent and come to opinions about what caused the death. If a normally healthy 50-year-old died and there was a toxicological examination of the person's organs, uh, both blood, which would show the current levels, and metabolate in urine, which would show levels from past consumption, all lead a medical examiner to be able to give an opinion and say, this is a normally healthy person. The cause of death was, septic shock. It was anaphylactic shock. It was, toxicity from the controlled substances. And, the doctor can talk about how there was kidney failure, heart failure, respiratory failure based upon what type of drug it was. So that relates to the cause of death. Then it's again linear. They would then go to what was the substance and where did it come from. When you have people like the people presented here, these aren't sophisticated criminals. These are people, who have an opportunistic approach to get a considerable amount of money from Mr. Perry by overcharging him, for these substances. So they leave all these footprints, the emails, the calls, the recordings, videos, that all of these things will come into play. And if you read the indictment consists of an allegation of a conspiracy. A conspiracy is an agreement between two or more people to commit a substantive crime. Conspiracy is called an inchoate crime, the actual event of distributing the drugs, possessing the drugs, and injecting the individual and issuing script when it's not medically necessary. All those things are substantive crimes. If you read the indictment, it starts at overt act number 1 all the way down to the end, which I think is in the 70s. An overt act is something done affirmatively to move the ends or means of the conspiracy forward. So, and they laid it out in a fashion that starts at point A and goes right through to the end. And it's done, with great skill. And these people have clearly investigated the case and spent considerable time working on it. And I've seen many probably 2,000 federal indictments, and this one is relatively simple in its allegations, straightforward in how it's presented. And if you follow the roadmap, they'll prove item number 1 and just go right down the line, and hopefully in their eyes bring the jury to the conclusions that these people got together, they acted together, they conspired, and as a result of that conspiracy, Mr. Perry was given drugs and is now deceased as a direct result of that.
Well, this is definitely something that we will be following closely. Thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. Anytime. Be well.
A U.S. district judge has set Placinia and Sonia's joint trial for March 4th, 2025. For Law and Crime News, I'm Kennedi Walker.